Upon returning from town, I whistled to myself, anticipating the customary tranquility of my farm, the soft rustling of the wind through the fields, the distant mooing of my cattle, and the familiar aroma of fresh soil. However, as soon as I entered my driveway, my blood pressure surged dramatically. My front meadow, my private property, had been converted into what can only be characterized as an affluent suburban circus. Tents, lawn chairs, and picnic blankets were present, with at least 40 individuals reclining, consuming mimosas, sampling charcuterie trays, and laughing like though they had purchased entry to my property. Children were sprinting across my vegetable garden, crushing the rows I had meticulously nurtured for months. In the midst of it all, commanding attention as if she were in charge, stood Diane Whitmore, guiding the flow of activity. I abruptly engaged the parking gear of my truck, causing the tires to skid on the dirt. My farm dog, Duke, jumped from the passenger seat, barking as he perceived my anger. I forcefully closed the door, my boots striking the ground with intent. Initially, individuals scarcely acknowledged my presence, preoccupied with toasting their glasses and grilling gourmet burgers on portable devices. As I approached Diane with clenched fists, she turned to confront me with a self-satisfied smirk, provoking a want to seize the nearest water hose and douse her thoroughly. "Oh, Jake," she claimed to be surprised, as though she had not engineered this entire catastrophe. "You have returned prematurely. We were simply relishing the exquisite weather on your delightful property." I gazed at her, my thoughts grappling with the arrogance required to organize a full HOA. Picnic on another's private farm, without even a courtesy call. What on earth? I spoke carefully, suppressing the snarl that was forming in my throat. "What are you doing on my property?" Diane laughed softly, gesturing with her well-groomed hand. "Please refrain from becoming overly dramatic. We are hosting a little neighborhood gathering." The neighborhood required a new, aesthetically pleasing location for socialization, and your farm is undeniably more visually appealing than the community park. I approached, reducing my vocal volume. "Are you referring to the community park that you actively contributed to closing in favor of constructing a beautiful pond?" She regarded me with a blink, indifferent. Specifics. "We require a location, and your farm possesses ample vacant area." "Vacant area?" I gritted my teeth with such intensity that they throbbed. "Diane, do you get the notion of private property? You cannot simply enter here with your wine club and host a festival on my yard." She exhaled in frustration, as though I were an obstinate child exhibiting a fit over a petty matter. "Jake, cease your territorial behavior. You possess numerous acres with no intended use. It is, quite frankly, egocentric of you to withhold sharing. Consider this an opportunity to foster goodwill throughout the community." I surveyed the surroundings. An elderly woman was erecting a badminton net between two of my fence posts. A gang of fathers was throwing a football perilously near my chicken coop. Two children were after my barn cat, while a man in cargo shorts was scrutinizing my tractor as if preparing it for auction. I inhaled deeply, my heartbeat racing. "I will provide precisely 5 minutes for you to vacate the premises." Diane expressed her exasperation by rolling her eyes. "Do not be absurd. We would do the task in a few hours. Simply enter, rest, or engage in an alternative activity. You will scarcely perceive our presence." I grinned at that moment, a deliberate, perceptive smile that caused Diane's confidence to waver for the first time since my arrival. "Affirmative," I replied, inclining my head. "If you refuse to depart voluntarily, I shall manage the situation according to my methods." Silently, I pivoted and walked decisively toward the barn. My bulls had been confined all day, agitated, yearning for an expanse to extend their limbs. I had intended to release them into the southern pasture later in the evening, but circumstances have altered. I arrived at the substantial wooden gate and unlatched it with a gratifying click. The bulls snorted, perceiving their liberation, their substantial hooves striking the ground. These were not your amiable, placid dairy cattle. These were bulls, characterized by muscle, horns, and a formidable demeanor, unaccustomed to unanticipated intruders in their domain. Behind me, I heard Diane continuing to expound on the necessity of embracing a spirit of welcome. At that moment, I opened the gate fully. A moment of stillness. Subsequently, accompanied by a rumbling like to distant thunder, the bulls advanced. Cries resounded across the picnic. Lawn chairs were overturned. Wine glasses were shattered. An individual toppled a whole folding table while hastily fleeing. A man plunged, headfirst into a children's pool designed for toddlers. Diane screamed, her beautiful sun hat dislodging as she attempted to run in her high heels. She did not progress significantly. Her foot became ensnared in an abandoned picnic blanket, causing her to fall face first onto the ground. My bulls, disinterested in genuine fighting, simply trampled through the turmoil, tossing their heads, snorting, and effectively ensuring that no one would feel overly secure trespassing on my property again. A man who had once been grilling steak was now endeavoring to climb my fence armed solely with a pair of tongs. Another woman had plunged into a thicket, where she stood, quaking, observing the bulls as if they were fire-breathing dragons. In the center of the scene, now soiled and with her sundress frayed at the hem, stood Diane. Her face was flushed with rage, her eyes fixed on me as if she were poised to initiate numerous lawsuits. "This is not concluded, Jake," she yelled, raising her fist as though she were a cartoon antagonist. "Do you believe you can instill fear in me? You are unaware of whom you are confronting." I rested on the fence, composed as always, tilting my hat back while I surveyed the devastation. "Well, Diane," I drawled, "I suppose you will reconsider organizing any further surprise picnics on my farm." With that, I summoned Duke, pivoted, and proceeded toward the house, leaving Diane and her HOA entourage to navigate their unforeseen bull run. Diane remained irate by the time the final member of her picnic group departed from my farm. Some others had misplaced their shoes in the dirt. Some bore wine-stained shirts from frantic encounters, and one notably unfortunate man had a stripe of barbecue sauce along his calf, the result of an overturned grill. The bulls, content after their brief reign of chaos, had returned to their customary grazing areas, their tails flicking languidly as if they had not just instigated a suburban exodus. I rested against my vehicle, arms folded, observing Diane's difficulty in regaining her composure. Her formerly immaculate sundress was marred by grime, and a solitary piece of lettuce adhered to her hair as a symbol of embarrassment. Her nostrils expanded as she swiftly retrieved her phone, aggressively tapping the screen. "You will come to repent this, Jake," she seethed, not even glancing up. "I promise on all that is sacred, you will face consequences for this." I merely shrugged. The sole aspect I lament is not procuring a beer to savor the performance. She directed a glare at me, so intense I believed it could penetrate my skull. Subsequently, with a theatrical exhale, she pivoted and marched towards her vehicle, muttering audibly throughout her departure. The remaining HOA members hastily followed her, eager to evade the turmoil I had just instigated. I presumed that was the conclusion of the matter. I was mistaken. 2 days later, I awoke to the cacophony of Duke barking incessantly. I donned my boots and emerged onto the porch, only to discover a police cruiser stationed in my driveway. A robust officer stood beside it, arms crossed, his expression inscrutable beneath the brim of his hat. "Good morning, Jake," he greeted, nodding in my direction. "Good morning, Sheriff," I responded, descending the porch steps. "Is there something I can assist you with?" He exhaled forcefully, massaging the bridge of his nose. "A complaint has been lodged against you for reckless endangerment, property damage, and public disturbance." I stared at him in disbelief. "Public disturbance? I reside on a farm." He directed a piercing gaze at me. "You unleashed a herd of bulls upon a group of individuals." I smirked. "A group of individuals who were trespassing on my property." He grumbled. "Listen, Jake, I am aware of Diane's character. Frankly, I wouldn't entrust her with organizing a bake sale, much less managing HOA. However, she is exerting considerable pressure on this matter. Her attorney is submitting documentation, portraying the situation as if you nearly incited a stampede through the town. I folded my arms, the humor evaporating from my expression. So, what? Does she intend for me to be arrested? Not entirely. However, she is certainly intent on litigating the matter. I exhaled slowly, gazing past the sheriff toward the expansive fields beyond. I should have anticipated that Diane would not accept the defeat gracefully. The woman resembled an unpleasant rash. Just when you believed you had eliminated her presence, she re-emerged with greater intensity than prior. Very well, I remarked, cracking my knuckles. She desires a confrontation? She possesses one. 2 days later, I found myself attending a town meeting. The event took place in the antiquated community hall, a venue that had not had such activity since the infamous bake-off controversy of 2009, when Mrs. Abernathy said that Mr. Turner utilized pre-packaged pie crust. The gathering was filled with locals, half of whom are farmers familiar with me since childhood, while the other half comprised HOA members who saw me as an eccentric criminal. Diane positioned herself at the front, an arrogant smile affixed to her visage. Despite having tidied herself after her mud-soaked humiliation, an aura of tightness lingered in her stance, as if she clutched her resentment tightly. Beside her was Todd, a well-groomed attorney who appeared to charge by the breath. The mayor, an elderly man who had held office for such an extended period that no one recalled voting for him, cleared his throat and leaned forward. Very well, everyone, let us proceed. It appears we have encountered a predicament involving Jake and the HOA. Diane rose abruptly. A predicament. This is an affront, a crime. She faced the throng, her eyes wide with righteous wrath. This individual unleashed ferocious, perilous creatures onto unsuspecting civilians. My pals might have sustained severe injuries, or worse. I scoffed audibly for the room to hear. Wild animals? Ma'am, they are bulls, not feral wolves. Diane disregarded my comment, producing a collection of documents. I possess witness statements, video evidence, and an official legal complaint. This conduct was reckless, unprovoked, and unprovoked. I interjected, advancing forward. You trespassed on my territory without consent, accompanied by 40 individuals, desecrated my property, and then audaciously portrayed me as the issue. The farmers present murmured in concurrence, with several nodding in affirmation. The HOA members, however, conspired among themselves as if I were a threat to society. Todd, the attorney, rose, fastening his suit jacket as if preparing to present a landmark case. Mr. Simmons, he stated easily, do you refute that you deliberately unleashed aggressive livestock in reaction to this assembly? I inclined my head. Do you refute that your client was trespassing? Todd responded with a constrained smile. My client believed this land was communal property. I let out a derisive laugh. Communal property? You refer to my property, the property for which I pay taxes, the property that I possess. Diane huffed. It was an unintentional error. I directed a stern look at her. It is amusing how your inadvertent error entails the arrangement of grills, tents, and decorations, as if you had meticulously orchestrated the entire event days prior. The meeting descended into silence. Even other HOA members regarded her with skepticism as the mayor massaged his temples. Very well. Here is my assessment. Diane, you and your HOA members erred by utilizing Jake's property without authorization. Jake, you likely should not have released a herd of bulls in retaliation. Yet, I must admit that I might have acted similarly. A few laughs resonated across the room. The mayor addressed Diane. Withdraw the charges, Diane. You are acutely aware that your case lacks merit, and should you persist, I will ensure that the entire community is informed of your true character. Diane tensed, her lips forming a thin line. For an instant, I believed she might erupt. However, she exhaled sharply and responded with a curt nod. Very well. However, this is not concluded, I remarked with a smirk. It never is with you, is it? With a theatrical gesture, she seized her bag and exited forcefully, her HOA supporters following closely. I looked to the mayor. I suppose that resolves the matter then. He laughed softly, for the time being. However, I would remain vigilant regarding her. That woman harbors resentments akin to a formidable, snapping turtle. I shook his hand and exited the meeting with a contented smile. Diane believed she had triumphed in the skirmish. She was oblivious to the fact that the conflict had merely commenced. Diane did not accept the defeat gracefully. This was evident when I awoke the following morning to discover a collection of official documents crammed into my mailbox. I extracted them, perusing the pages with a frown. Property dispute. She was indeed attempting to assert that a segment of my land was not legally mine, claiming that an archaic zoning technicality rendered it community property. I exhaled slowly, suppressing the want to fold the papers into a ball and discard them to my bulls. I took my truck keys and proceeded directly to the county records office. If Diane wished to engage in legal maneuvers, I would reciprocate. The receptionist at the counter was my old acquaintance, Mrs. Barlow, who had been employed there since before my birth. She scrutinized the documents I handed her, adjusting her spectacles, her lips forming a tight line as she perused them. "Oh, she is in a state of desperation," she murmured, perusing the documents on her desk. "I recall this land being duly deeded to your family, vividly. Do you believe she has any basis for her claims?" I inquired, leaning on the counter. Mrs. Barlow derided. "Unless she has. Discovered a time machine and traveled back 70 years to alter the documents. This is not possible." She retrieved an aged, tattered file and placed it before me. "Your grandfather acquired this land legitimately through a lawful property transfer. The one possession Diane has is wishful thinking." I smiled. Optimal. That ought to have concluded the matter. Diane was not the sort to concede without resistance. She possessed financial resources, influence, and sufficient legal acumen to be a nuisance to me. A week later, I received a formal lawsuit. She was not merely asserting a portion of my territory. She sought to litigate for damages, asserting that my bulls had inflicted emotional anguish and jeopardized public safety. The sum she requested was preposterous, yet that was not the crux of the matter. She was indifferent to the financial aspect. Her sole intention was to render my life intolerable. I was determined not to allow her victory. I retained my own attorney, an experienced cowboy named Ed, who had been managing issues of this nature longer than Diane had existed. He was the kind of individual who attended court wearing a bow tie and cowboy boots, indifferent to elaborate legal terminology. Upon our discussion of the case, he merely chuckled. "She is resorting to desperate measures," he remarked, perusing the case documents. "She is anticipating that you will agree to a settlement merely to eliminate her. She is not well acquainted with me." "Is she?" I stated, cracking my knuckles. "Id exhibited asnir." "No, but she is about to be enlightened." The court date was established, and the entire town was abuzz with anticipation. Residents took sides, with half supporting me and the other half murmuring that Diane was merely attempting to refine the area. It was absurd. The woman relocated to a rural community and then expressed discontent about residing adjacent to a farm. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was filled to capacity. Diane arrived exuding confidence, adorned in an elegant business suit that likely exceeded my monthly mortgage and cost. Her attorney, Todd, accompanied her, rifling through documents as if he possessed significant information. Ed leaned toward me and murmured, "Are you prepared for some amusement?" I smiled broadly. "Always." The judge, an elderly man likely familiar with every absurd case imaginable, groaned while examining the documents before him. "Very well, let us proceed. M.S. Whitmore, you are asserting claims for damages against Mr. Simmons arising from an incident that occurred on his premises." Diane rose, adjusting her jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Simmons unleashed aggressive livestock upon a group of unsuspecting residents, engendering a perilous situation that could have led to significant injury." The judge directed his attention towards me. "Mr. Is this real, Simmons?" I stood, inclining my hat slightly. Your Honor, MS. Whitmore and her guests trespassed on my land without my consent. I undertook appropriate measures to reclaim my property, Todd scoffed. Appropriate? You released bulls upon a gathering of civilians. Ed inclined his body forward. Your Honor, may I present evidence? The judge acquiesced, and Ed retrieved a substantial envelope, sliding it across the desk. The judge opened it and extracted a collection of photographs, vividly depicting Diane and her associates preparing their picnic, transporting grills, and arranging tables. One particularly incriminating image featured Diane beaming as she brandished a bottle of wine, posing beside a handcrafted banner that read, HOA Spring Gathering. The judge's expression soured. MS. Whitmore, this appears to be a deliberate act rather than an accident. Diane shifted uneasily. It was a misinterpretation, Ed replied with a chuckle. Your Honor, we possess signed testimonies from several witnesses, neighbors who attended this event, affirming that MS. Whitmore deliberately organized this gathering on Mr. Simmons' property without authorization. The court appeared unfazed. MS. Whitmore, you violated private property rights. You lack the legal entitlement to be present there. Regarding the aggressive livestock, he moaned, massaging his temples, it is a farm. Livestock is inherent to farms. Todd endeavored to rectify the situation. Your Honor, my client was oblivious to the fact that the land was private property. The judge interrupted him. Are you asserting that your client was unaware that the enclosed farm, complete with barns, crops, and livestock, was not private property? Todd paused momentarily before resuming his seat. The judge responded with a shake of his head. Case dismissed. MS. Whitmore, I recommend you comprehend the distinction between communal areas and private property before unnecessarily expending the court's time again. The gavel struck. In an instant, it concluded. Diane flushed crimson, her mouth agape, as if she intended to dispute, yet no words emerged. Ultimately, she seized her purse and exited with fervor, her heels striking the floor with irritation. I exited, breathing in the crisp air. The assembled townspeople congratulated me with hearty backslaps, laughter, and handshakes. She genuinely believed she would triumph in that instance. Ed laughed, readjusting his hat. She will return, I remarked, stretching. Individuals of her disposition invariably are. I was correct. Diane persisted. However, she refrained from attempting to reclaim my land thereafter. Instead, she resorted to passive-aggressive notes, superfluous HOA bylaws, and sporadic complaints to the town board regarding the odor from my farm animals. Consequently, I ensured that my new chicken coop was situated as near to the HOA property boundary as feasible. I concluded that if Diane desired to reside near a farm, she should fully immerse herself in the experience.